Hi, everybody. This is Cindy Kennedy, and you are listening to another episode of Living with Lyme. And today we are going to be talking with a PANS and PANDAS, very knowledgeable mom, and she's going to tell us a lot about how she got into this field. This is Maria Rickert-Hong, and she had a career change. She was a former Wall Street sell-side research analyst, and now she has become a certified health holistic coach, and she's the author of a best-selling book called Almost Autism: Recovering Children from Sensory Processing Disorder. This is a reference for both parents and practitioners. She's also a co-author of Brain Under Attack, which is yet another resource for children with PANS and PANDAS and Autoimmune Encephalitis. She really works with people, helping them with diet and lifestyle, and really helping the parents make the best out of what's going on for their children. And you can read the rest of her bio on my website, www.livingwithlyme.us. I encourage you to subscribe to stay connected and help me with my numbers so I can continue with financing. Anyways, everybody, this is a warm welcome I want to give to Maria. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, that's so awesome. So awesome. You know, it's very difficult to find people who have done what you have done. And you left probably a very lucrative life, and you have moved over because of personal experience. And I want you to tell the listeners and the viewers what happened that brought you into this arena.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had decided before, when I was pregnant, that I would be quitting my Wall Street job, just because when you work on Wall Street, you typically work long hours for the norm. And then when it's earnings season, you work, till 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's, I would never get to see my baby. I'm like, what's the point? Just hand him over to some nanny? I don't think so. So I'd quit when he was born, and he developed a whole host of problems. He was failure to thrive. He had projectile vomiting. He threw up after every single meal. He had asthma. He had eczema. He had allergies. And then he developed hypotonia when he was 3 months old.
And tell us what that is.
Low muscle tone. He was a very strong baby. I have pictures of him. He was very strong at 3 months, and then all of a sudden he developed into being a very floppy baby.
That must have been really frightening.
Well, I didn't really realize it at the time, right? Because I'm a new mom and I didn't really understand. And, I was going to a pediatric practice with rotating doctors. And so there wasn't one person other than me who really had an eye on him for his development. And so I just didn't really know that was an issue. But then he developed developmental delays. He couldn't crawl. When he did crawl, he crawled backwards at 8 months. And then he crawled on his tummy. So he did army crawling.
I see.
Till he was 19 months old. And then when he was 19 months old, he finally did the cross crawling on his hands and his knees. And then he finally walked when he was 20 months old, and all the sensory processing issues. And it was just like one thing on top of the other, and he was on 10 different medications. It was just not a good way to live, but I went along with it because that's what the doctors had said to do.
Right. And when you don't know any better, and you don't have that knowledge and research and those kind of things, and being a new mom, it must have been very difficult. You really do put all of your trust into the providers that are taking care of you.
Right. Yeah. And being disconnected from family as well, because I was living in New York City. My family is from down south. It's like I didn't have anybody that I could just come on over and take a look, like my sister, who has 7 kids, and she may have been able to tell me something a little bit more, if she were there all the time, but she wasn't. So, and that's hard. Yeah, you do have to put your trust in the doctors, although I will say I was very dismissed as a neurotic first-time mom, and, you don't know what you're talking about, and he patting me on the head, little woman kind of thing, and just go off and do what we tell you to do. So
very disrespectful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because as a nurse practitioner, sometimes when I have repeat customers, so, people repeat flyers, as we call them, or frequent flyers.
Frequent flyers, yeah.
Frequent flyers. I would ask them, really, what's your biggest concern? What really is your fear?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you know about what's going on? And when you ask somebody, sometimes they get a big insight into, gosh, these are the things that are really worrying me, and I haven't talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry that happened, because
Yeah,
that's just not right.
I agree.
So how do we go from there? We've got, a 2-year-old here, and what went on after that?
Well, he had developed a really bad case of asthma. We had gone to LA, and there were some forest fires there with lots of smoke. And then we
Oh, right.
came home. And his asthma was so bad that we almost had to take him to the hospital for emergency treatment. And we were able not to, but he was on a nebulizer, he was on Xopenex, he was on an inhaler, all these sorts of things. And I had started to see a naturopath for myself a few months earlier, because of all the things, we can talk about that later, but I had started to have my own health problems, and it was really due to the stress of dealing with a child like this, especially the lack of sleep, because he was waking up 6 times a night and waking me up 6 times a night, and that's just not good for anybody. And so I had started to see some really good results for myself working with a naturopath. And so I thought, well, let me take my son to the naturopath.
So for you, what were your benefits?
Well, yeah, one of the things that was really affecting me was middle of the night insomnia, right? And so I would wake up, if my son wasn't waking me up, then I would wake up on my own about 1:00 in the morning and not be able to go back to sleep for 2 to 3 hours.
Just
And
in time for him to wake you up again?
yeah, and and then your cortisol starts to kick in, and then you can't go back to sleep. And so and I was just fatigued, like severely fatigued. And so working with my naturopath for those kinds of issues, because I'd gone the traditional route, my gynecologist had given me Ambien, he'd given me Zoloft, and neither one of those helped, especially with the sleep. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? I need to, at my wit's end, what am I going to do? And so working with my naturopath had helped with those kinds of things, and, started to learn more about diet and how diet can affect my health and those kinds of things. Although I hadn't made any changes for my kids at that point. So
Right. Well, sometimes we have to experience
Mhm.
first, and maybe in the beginning, the thought of what they're doing for you maybe did not apply.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know. And so because my son had that bad asthma episode, I brought him to the naturopath, and first thing he said was to cut out the dairy. And I'm like, what? This kid lives on dairy because he's failure to thrive. The doctors had told me, take him to McDonald's and feed him all that and give him all the fattening cheese and, cheesy fries and chicken nuggets and yogurt and macaroni and cheese and whatever, loaded with dairy kinds of food. And, he'd been to see an allergist, he'd been to see a gastroenterologist, and nobody had ever said anything about cutting out dairy. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll try it, because I trust you, and I've had good results with you. And when I did, he stopped throwing up after every meal. Yeah. And this is a kid who had been on Prevacid too, right? He'd been on Prevacid for a couple of years. Both he and his brother were on it, which I now know, like, severely dangerous.
Right. Ruins your ability for your stomach to produce that hydrochloric acid long term. That leads to poor pancreatic enzymes, that leads to overgrowth of the bad bacteria, which leads to small bowel issues, SIBO to be one.
Yeah.
And so were you able to take him off the Prevacid right away?
Yes. And I was shocked and really angry when I learned this. I'm like, what else aren't they telling me? And that's when I started diving down rabbit holes, right? Like, because I'm a researcher, that's what I do. And started to take out gluten as well, because a lot of the dairy-free recipes that I found were gluten-free as well. And so I found a great cookbook called the Kid-Friendly Autism and ADHD Cookbook. And they did a really good job in there of identifying potential, not necessarily allergens, because it's not an IgE allergy in most cases for these kids. It's more of a sensitivity or an intolerance. But if you go to an allergist, they don't test for. Because we had gone to the allergist in Mount Sinai in New York City and done the skin prick test, and oh, he's fine with dairy. I'm like, okay, let's go eat all this food. And that wasn't the case. They don't believe in sensitivities or intolerances.
Right. You talk to mainstream medicine and you say anything about leaky gut, they roll their eyes. They don't really, but there's a lot of research out there, and it's the difference is for an allergy, you produce IgE, and that leads down the whole rabbit hole of histamine to mast cell activation. Whereas with a sensitivity, you're going to produce an antibody. And dairy and gluten can really wreck the lining of the intestinal wall, and then things leak through, and then your body sees these proteins as invaders, and then they make those antibodies. But healing up that intestinal wall is really what you really need to do. It sounds like, I'm all about divine intervention. I feel very sometimes intuitive. Drives my daughter crazy. She's the second half of my practice that she does all the nutrition. She's a registered dietitian. But what happens is that I think of you, and I think of your first career, and I think of your passion for research. And that led you, when you had to face this, quote unquote crisis, that you kind of knew the basics of research and how to find things and how one thing can lead to another, as you said, the rabbit hole. But you could digest that information, and you could separate yourself from feeling that you were kind of, pushed off or, patted on the head kind of thing. And then you had your personal stuff that led you to the naturopath, that led you to bring your children there. And then that's probably where your desire to make changes or help other people make changes, because that's the whole thing. And that's with my history of Lyme and my history of not being able to figure out what's credible, what's not credible. If you look at any of these support groups, people are trying desperately to get some sort of information. And the problem is what's good for one may not be good for exactly the other. So you change careers, you're a new mom, you've got now 2 children, as you said, and you're like, I can do more. And so what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you say, I'm going to do this book? Or did you say, I'm going to learn and how to take care of my children, make some big changes? When you saw the changes, you brought about the book.
Exactly. Yeah. The book is a result of my looking for, and I didn't know that recovery was possible, right? I was just trying to get my kid a little bit better here and there. I didn't know that he can make such improvements in leaps and bounds. And so the book came as a result of my experiences, because I'm like, I don't want another parent to have to go through this. It took so much, it was wasted time, right? And like so much time, so much energy, so much money. And if I could just help people, by coming up with a roadmap, by saying, okay, let's look at these things first, like you say, like the gut and the diet and those kinds of things first. And then what comes next, right? What do you do? So I just didn't want other parents to have to go through that. It was enough for me to do. And I know I'm a pretty good researcher, so I was able to do it, but I don't know if most people would be able to.
Right. Because they don't have the skill that you have, and you probably have an intense passion for promoting and giving this information because you had that human experience. They always talk about the human experience because we have to relate. You have to relate to something, and it's not just like somebody saying, oh, I think I'll, learn and talk about PANS and PANDAS and where it comes from and whatnot, because if you don't experience it, and you don't have that relative information. So, you've got these kids, you're seeing benefits, you're now got all this research, and it has led us to our discussion today. And let's dive in. I love that term, dive in. You can see the water, et cetera. You just dive in. But tell us what it is. What are PANS? What are PANDAS? What is this all about?
Okay, so these are acronyms. PANS and PANDAS are both acronyms, basically meaning that there are infections that have crossed the blood-brain barrier and are causing chronic symptoms. And so the symptoms can look something like OCD or tics, whether it's a motor tic or a verbal tic or a throat clearing tic, if it's something that's repetitive. That's kind of a clue. You can have I can't hear you all of a sudden. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. That's my fault. Did you go, is that the tic, that little
Yeah, yeah. They could be like twitching or a shoulder shrug or a head jerking kind of thing or whatever, So there could be those kinds of tics, or there could be ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder.
That's difficult to handle.
Yeah, of course. You could have behavioral regressions. You could have academic regressions. You could have developmental regressions, and handwriting problems, developmental delays, sensory issues.
This isn't just, OCD, ADD. This is extensive, and this is great for me to even learn because, I knew the basics, and this is deeper.
It is. It's much deeper, and it crosses many different labels. And so, as you probably tell your clients and patients, forget the label, right? Because it's really, you got to look at the root causes. But the problem is that people identify with the label. So they think, my kid has ADD, I'm not going to listen to what you have to say, or my kid has OCD, I'm not going to listen to you, or my kid has autism, or whatever. But the thing is that all of those things could really be the same thing, as well as sensory processing disorder or learning disabilities or things like that.
Right. So, thinking about it, the root cause, this is a new term for people. People, deal with what they're given. Here's the box. This is what they're dealing with. And they don't look upstream.
They don't say why.
Yeah, why is this happening? Oh, they'll relate it to something that's happened or given to them, or it certainly can be infectious bacterial that leads to this. This is where that Lyme comes in, and I know the S on the PANDAS has to do with a strep infection. Yes. But everybody thinks, oh, well, I got my antibiotics for whatever the length of period of time, and that's it. That's all I needed. Because right. If you do have something like a bladder infection, we'll make it real simple. Right. You get your 7 to 10 days. Now even we're giving 5 days or even 3 days for some, and boom, you're done. Mm-hmm. They relate an antibiotic to a cure.
Right.
Okay. So, let's talk a little bit more about it. I'm thinking of your son and how he was really having right away sensitivity to the dairy. Mm-hmm. Was he breastfed?
Yes, he was.
So
thank God.
yeah. I remember back in the day, Nutramigen, which is that allergy-free kind of stuff, ended up, being somewhere, these parents are spending $200 or more a month.
Yes.
Back in the day for that. So maybe what we're talking about is your drinking milk transferring over mm-hmm. to your little guy, right?
Right. That could be part of it for sure.
So what are the symptoms? It sounds like you gave us an array of symptoms mm-hmm. For your son, but tell me, what are the more common ones? What are moms and dads looking for with their kids?
Usually some kind of extreme behavioral kind of issue, especially a sudden onset. It's not always sudden onset, but that's typically how it gets defined. When I looked back on my son's health history, it was actually sudden onset, but I didn't really catch it. So it had been going on for years, right? And so a sudden onset of rages. My younger son was actually the one who really turned my attention toward this, because he was, I think, about 9 years old, and he had gone over to the neighbor's house and he had been playing with them. Came home very angry, and he'd been an angry kid for a few years now, and I just thought, well, maybe it's a blood sugar issue. I didn't really know. Came home, stomped upstairs, slammed the door, came down half an hour later, and he pulled out half the hair on top of his head. Yeah. So we figured something's going on, right? That he's that angry that he would do something like that. And so that's when we started to really say, what's going on here?
Here comes the light bulb, right?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I thought I was done with all this stuff, and there's more. There's another layer. There's always another layer. It feels like I have to personally go through these things, well, my kids actually go through these things for me to learn about them so that I can help others, is how I take it.
So what do you feel caused this to occur in not just one, but two of your children?
Yeah, well, strep, chronic strep infection that had crossed into the brain, right? And then Lyme as well, right? And so, and this is one of the caveats that I will say, and I think this is why people don't see good results and maybe are seen as chronic patients, is because there's typically not one infection that will appear. There's typically multiple infections. They can be viral. They can be, things like Epstein-Barr virus or cytomegalovirus, HHV6, things like that. But there are also bacterial infections like the strep. You can get Lyme in there and all the different Lyme co-infections that go in there with it. You could have an influenza virus that crosses into the brain. You could have mycoplasma. And so typically there's not just one infection. And the problem in going to a PANDAS literate doctor or something is that they may just test for the PANDAS and say, oh, well, that's it. Here have, I think it's augmentin or amoxicillin or something that's given for that, right? To get rid of the strep infection, and boom, you're done. Well, that's not always the case, because normally these kids have disrupted or dysregulated immune systems, which, we're going to dial all the way back, and we're going to take a look at all of the tummy problems that my son was having. And they both had these kinds of issues when they were little, right?
Right. Do you feel that some of this was an issue that you had in terms of any infections that you were harboring, and transplacentally you actually,
I'm going to be horrible.
That away?
I'm going to be horrible, and I'm going to tell you I've never been tested for it, or probably should be, given where I live in Connecticut. So I need to do that. But I wasn't living in Connecticut at the time, but who knows these days, right? There is a lot of research out there that says, especially as far as the herpetic virus infections, that if the mother has those kinds of infections, then their child is much more likely to develop a neurodevelopmental disorder. So neurodevelopmental disorder would be anything from autism to ADD, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, learning disabilities, those kinds of things. But I would include OCD in there as well, right?
This is tough. A long time ago, it was really shocking. And it was a long time ago when a young boy was probably around 12. I bet you know this story. All of a sudden got this OCD about being on a bike. And he was on a bike unless he was at school or eating or sleeping. Mm-hmm. And and the parents were very crazy, and, repetitive doctor appointments, and, just the diagnosis. There was no why is this happening? And of course they went to several practitioners, and then got down to the point where someone really spread the paper out, went through all of it, and noticed that there had been an episode, I'm not sure how far back, but that he had a tick bite. Wow. And when it was tested, there we go. We've got Lyme. Once we treated the Lyme, he didn't have as much obsessive compulsive regarding riding that bike. For all we know, he threw it away. It's, and he's not, at this point, he's an adult, mm-hmm. and we should find out if he's training for the Tour de France.
That's a good one. I have to do this.
Yes. So, that was one of the first types of what happens after infection, what happens in the brain. I do have to ask you, when we talk about PANDAS,
Okay.
and then we talk about autoimmune encephalitis.
Right.
What they're obviously in the same category, but can you describe one versus the other versus the other?
I would say autoimmune encephalitis, or AE, is really the overarching acronym of what's going on. It's basically when the brain is inflamed, and it appears as if something as if the brain is attacking itself, or the body is attacking the brain. I think that's actually a misnomer, that there are infections that are going on in the brain that are just not being discovered, right? So, and then PANDAS would be really sort of the equivalent for that. Autoimmune encephalitis is probably a diagnosis that's given more to an adult, as like in the book Brain on Fire, that book. PANS or PANDAS, because of the P, they would have the pediatric component to them. But PANS would be the pediatric equivalent of autoimmune encephalitis, and then PANDAS, because it's just strep, would be the subset of PANS. But PANS can include PANDAS, it can include Lyme disease, it can include any kind of environmental or toxic or infectious assault that can cause a blood-brain barrier breach that can allow these infections to come in.
So kids are more susceptible. Why? I mean, we'll talk about adults too, but why children?
That's a good question. I guess because their brains are sort of growing, all the time, and growing and changing. Maybe the blood-brain barrier is just more permeable at that age. I don't know. I haven't seen research on that question, but that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you get to the root cause? I mean, are we just testing for all this type of?
You can, but the thing to remember is that it's a clinical diagnosis, right? And so you've probably seen this. You can run all the tests and spend thousands of dollars for it, but they may be negative. But that doesn't mean that your kid doesn't have it, which can be really maddening to a parent who's spending all this money, and the insurance companies and the healthcare practitioner, right? So it really comes down to working with a clinician who is versed in working with all of these kinds of things.
How do you find a person, a practitioner? Is there a research or a resource online that you can get someone to?
Yeah, there are networks. I believe there's like New England PANS Association, PANDAS Association, but I am the education and media director for a nonprofit called Epidemic Answers, ANSWERS, and we let parents know about root causes of a whole bunch of childhood disorders, because 1 in 54 kids these days has a chronic health condition, and that's not right. It wasn't like that when I was a kid. So what's going on? And so we try to educate parents, and that's what I do. I run webinars, I run newsletters, but we also have a practitioner directory where you can go and you can search for a Lyme practitioner or a PANDAS practitioner, nutrition, all sorts of therapists that could help your kid. And you could search by your zip code to find somebody in your area. It's not a complete database. I would tell people to keep looking back because we keep adding people all the time, but that's a good place to start.
Do you think that the first thing you should do is do some of the testing that looks for an infectious agent, at least as looking for a root cause?
That helps. I mean, it helps to confirm the diagnosis if it is there, and if those are positive, then yeah, you kind of know what you're looking for. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So even if we don't have a positive test in any of these categories, how do you begin a healing process?
Well, it always starts with the gut and changing the diet, which is not what people want to hear, but I'm sure you talk about this too, because you got to heal the gut, because that's where most of the immune system is. And you got to get the immune system strong enough to where it can fight off these offenders. Always start with that.
Exactly. And one of my biggest concerns are for people who are out there and they are on long-term antibiotics and given just a probiotic.
Yeah.
in hopes to combat what the antibiotics are killing off in the intestine. They're not told, and maybe they don't know, that you really need to follow up with what you're eating. You are what you eat. And in my practice, Pursue Wellness, we really start there. Like, people are like, well, I have Lyme. I want to go on herbs to kill it. Well, okay, we're going to get there.
Okay.
But it's the peeling the onion.
Yes.
What's the worst thing? I mean, we could pump people either with the antibiotic or with the herbal stuff, but if we don't heal the gut, the source of where things are really causing some autoimmunity, we're kind of shoveling poop against the tide, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, with that, you had that journey from one, I don't want to say vocation, job, I'll say. And then you got all this impetus and you went into the next. So how did you train? What made you train? Did you just happen to follow up and see something about being a health coach? Or did you say, I can help? What's the level that I can help with?
Yeah, I wanted to help, and I was trying to, tell other moms. I would see, kids with health problems, and sometimes they listened to me, sometimes they wouldn't. And I thought, well, maybe if I have a little bit of credential, then they would listen to me, more of a platform, than I could get out there, and then they would listen to me, because I was older and I didn't really think that going back to medical school or naturopathic school would really be an option, right? Because that just takes a long time, and I wanted to help people in the meantime. So I became a health coach, and then also wrote the 2 books, right? And just as a way to help people.
How did you network with the other author in the book that you co-authored?
Oh, yeah, they're with my nonprofit. So it's actually published through my nonprofit, Epidemic Answers. And so Beth Lambert is the executive director. And she wrote a book called A Compromised Generation, 9 years ago, I think it was. But she talks about the perfect storm of what's going on. Why do so many kids have chronic health conditions these days, right? So her, and then Roseanne Capenna-Hodge, was on our board. You know her, right?
Yes. She actually introduced us.
Yes, she did. She's fabulous. Neurofeedback practitioner. She's also an educational psychologist in EDD, right? And so she is the one that you would go to get your kid tested for
EDD. Tell us what EDD is.
Oh, she would know better, because I'm not one, but but if you think your kid has a neurodevelopmental or behavioral condition that he or she might need a 504 or an IEP for, then you would go to somebody like her to do the testing and the evaluation. But she also does really cool stuff of neurofeedback and biofeedback. And she is, I think, as far as I know, the only kind of practitioner that is looking holistically. So looking at the diet, and she can see, she's probably talked to you about this before, how cleaning up the diet actually affects the way the brain functions. And she can tell from the brain maps that she does, like, if the kid is eating a clean diet.
Right. It would be so nice to have one area center, and you come in and you buy your package and you go through. It's kind of like a ginormo detox, right? You go through one, you start with, okay, here's the gut person. And then you move on to the coach person who helps you continue with the gut. Then you go on to, some treatment strategies, and maybe I have something here. I mean, I have to show you my shirt here. Where am I? There I am. See?
Lyme awareness of Cape Cod. Oh, yeah, nice.
God. Yeah. So, Ron Gangemi has that center, and there are a few practitioners there and some out people. And so that's a really great place for some people down here, either in the Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket area, or even people in the South Shore. And I think that you probably know the Pandas Center in Cohasset, is it?
I actually don't know that one. I'm sorry.
You don't? Okay, that's in Massachusetts. You guys in Connecticut and Massachusetts, we're all kind of related, so I'll have to give you that information.
Yeah, send it to me.
I will. I want to just take a quick break here and give a shout out to all of my listeners in Europe. Thank you for tuning in. And I also want to thank all my sponsors, Hopkinton Pharmacy, who is in Hopkinton, Mass. They're a compounding area for practitioners to utilize. I also want to thank Biobotanical Research, Rachel Fresco, for her unwavering support, and Master Supplements. Master Supplements is a great variety of probiotics, prebiotics, fibers, etc., that really can help the gut. And what's nice is it comes in different formulations. So if we're talking about children here, they do have the granules, and that can be utilized very easily if you're trying to use some, I don't know, something you can mix it in, I guess. So that's it. So thank you, all of my helpers out there that are working diligently. And I keep telling people, be part of the solution. Don't be part of the problem. So excellent, excellent, excellent. I do have another question, and I'm looking at my questions here because I want to know what the experts are saying. What are the experts saying about this? Are we close to closing in on teaching? Are we close to closing in on getting more initial treatment early on? Are we making any headway?
That's a tricky question, because if you read the medical literature, it's actually been out there since I found 1964 that we've been talking about this. As far as herpetic viruses infecting the brain and causing symptoms of autism, right? Are we any closer? I'm not really sure, but we did interview quite a few of those leading edge practitioners in the Brain Under Attack book. And so you can read what they have to say. But as far as mainstream, that's always tricky. I think that's just going to take a while to work its way through the system in order for them to embrace something as simple as nutrition, right? I think once nutrition is looked at and not poo-pooed, then maybe they'll start to get more attention from mainstream practitioners. There is some really good research that's come out from Jim Adams at Arizona State University in relation to food and autism. Julie Matthews and other people were also a part of that study. But if you have some really heavy-hitting research that's out there, then maybe some of those practitioners will stop poo-pooing the parents who say, this worked. I took my kid off of gluten and dairy, and it's not for everybody. It's not 100% of the time, but you can see improvements, right?
I think that's what we're after. We're after trying to normalize a life, because you're so busy from one step to the next step. And, at the time you said your son was on 10 types of medications.
Yes.
Well, what did you do? I mean, that's like, how do you get a little one to take all that medicine?
Well, they put it in liquid form, and it's got all sorts of nasty parabens, and then probably high fructose corn syrup and artificial colors and artificial flavors, which I cringe at now, and I would never give to him now. But
people don't know. People don't know. Yeah. And if it's not brought to, I'm having trouble talking today. I don't know why, but if it needs to be brought to the forefront, and I'm hoping, I don't know if it'll ever happen or it will be a long time, because things do take a while, but medical schools for nurse practitioners, schools for physician assistants, they need to start talking about root causes instead of talking about the Band-Aid approach of, okay, let's just do this medicine. There is a place for medicine. There truly is. Sure. Mm-hmm. Especially when there's acute things going on. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of someone who had rapid onset of dementia. A thriving human, engaging, pretty brilliant, and then boom, a rapid decline. So, in maybe that type of situation, you really don't want them to lose their function. So you may try some things, but, we talk about adults now, or I want to talk about adults, because, we hear a lot about this for children. Right. What type of verbiage do we use for adults?
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky because if you look at something like Alzheimer's or dementia, in the autism community, they'll actually refer to Alzheimer's as adult onset autism. I don't know if you've heard that term. And there's also type 3 diabetes, right?
Why?
So
What's diabetes got to do with it?
it's a blood sugar issue, right?
Hmm.
So there's Dr. Daniel Amen, who's got the Amen clinics out in California, and he does these SPECT scans that are fascinating, that show how blood flow moves through the brain. And somebody that has, he specializes in ADD and ADHD, but I would think that it's very similar in a patient with Alzheimer's, right? If you do these SPECT scans, that you can see where there's blood flow just not going to different parts of the brain. The blood sugar can actually affect that blood flow. And so,
How do we improve it?
well,
Go back to the gut again?
go back to the gut. But, I believe blood sugar issues are one of the key things that are underlying all of these things that I've been talking about. And that's really kind of not really being paid attention to. I see a lot of kids on these spectrums that I've talked about tend to be hypoglycemic, right? So they tend to have low blood sugar, which is a problem because you'll get cranky, you get irritable, and all those kinds of things. But you could turn into somebody who's diabetic very quickly because the brain needs sugar, demands sugar. And so what you're going to do is you're going to eat something really sugary to satisfy that, but you're going to be on the blood sugar roller coaster, right? So you got to get the blood sugar steady.
Right. Because your body tends to overproduce in an area that has been underproduced, or underproduced in an area that has been overproduced.
Sure.
And we don't know, especially with youngsters, we really feel that type 1 diabetes has to do with an autoimmunity. We don't have that all down pat, but at least we're saying, okay, there are a set of autoimmune diseases that occur through whatever mechanism. We can start talking about leaky gut, things get through, you make antibodies, and then all of a sudden the antibodies get confused and they start mimicking and attacking other parts. So if we're attacking the thyroid, you get a thyroiditis, whether it's underactive. It's mostly underactive because, but it can be overactive. You talk about diabetes, we talk about the pancreas, what we're doing to the pancreas and eliminating its function and ability to produce the insulin. But you can talk about all kinds of body issues, the joint issues with rheumatoid arthritis, and the brain issues with MS. Now, is there any association with all of this?
I haven't seen that with MS, but I was going to go back and tell you more about Anti-Nmda receptor encephalitis, which is what you typically see in adults. So, right.
All right. Say that again.
Nmda, which is N-methyl D aspartate receptor.
Okay.
Encephalitis, right?
Okay.
So it's basically, an infection can be in the brain. And I have seen a lot of research that's come out lately that's talked about adults with Alzheimer's or dementia actually having infections very similar to what we're talking about here, right? And there are a lot more adults that have, early onset dementia or Alzheimer's that, I don't think it's just a genetic kind of thing. And I think a lot of leading edge researchers and practitioners are actually looking at this thing. So what happens when you have the NMDA receptor encephalitis or is that it's basically a glutamate receptor. And that's one of the things that is common to all of these neurodevelopmental disorders or neurological disorders is that you get the release of glutamate. And glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter. And it can cause all those weird kind of symptoms. GABA would be the neurotransmitter that's very calming. And when you get the two that are out of balance, then that can create a problem. Usually it's an excess of glutamate, which is something that Dr. Russell Blaylock wrote about in his book, Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. Fantastic book, written a long time ago. I love his newsletters. I mean, if you want to.
That's good to know. And it's yet another resource. And I want to jump back about the genetics. Mm-hmm. Remember, and this is what I have learned, and I'm really excited to know this information. Your genetics even though you get them, it doesn't mean that they're going to be expressed.
Right.
They're just something out there to be kind of aware of. So if you have a tendency towards something, there has to be like that perfect storm. And we talk about epigenetics, everything that's around us that affect our genes, whether it be our environment, our food, contaminants, mold, heavy metals, all of these things that really become that perfect storm and tip us off.
Right.
It doesn't, genes are predictors. So knowing that gene profile, I like Bob Miller's company, Methyl Testing, and I've run a lot of people's blood work. Well, actually, it's not blood, it's saliva through there. And those people who have the 23andMe and are having difficulty, I've had several patients come to me and say, can you do anything with this? And I've talked to like 4, 5, 10 doctors, and they don't know how to read it. They don't know what to do with it. And what's nice, I can put it through a program, and the program then comes out with, do you have one variant? Do you have 2 variants? And how many in a specific path? And I do have people that tend to run high on the glutamate, and that makes it really difficult for them to power down and to rest.
Yeah, the GAD65 test that you can
Yes. Right. And this is all part of the program. So you get not just that type of testing, but you do get a variety of different things. And one of the things that I like is there is a not pharmaceutical, supplementceutical, nutraceutical company that I work with. You know that one, what that is. The initials are PHP, and they're Physician Health. I don't know what the other P is for, but it should be an F because it should be formulas. But they have a wonderful product that I use because I tend to be high glutamate. And it's a glutamate scavenger, and it's herbal.
I've heard of that one,
It's awesome because what it does is it actually helps make that conversion happen. And so people use it if they're really having a hard time, like even in the afternoon or specifically kind of before bed. And, it can be quite helpful for people who have sleep disorders. Just about, they say 100% of Lyme sufferers have sleep issues at some point. And this can be helpful. Now, talking about neurotransmitters, people who are high on the glutamate scale, it doesn't necessarily always pose a problem, but those people are the driven, motivated, creative kind of people, whereas people who are higher on the GABA are just kind of like laid back Lennies and, whatever. So, there's benefits to both of those.
Right. But there are certain kinds of foods, that can create an excess of glutamate. And you should have Katie Reed on here. I don't know if you know who she is. She's a biochemical researcher, and she has the nonprofit called Unblind My Mind. It's either Unblind My Mind or Unblind Your Mind.
Oh, great. What you have to do is, if you can, connect us by email.
Yeah, I will for sure. And she's done a TED Talk about how her daughter has autism. And, she's a biochemical researcher, and she always wondered, well, why is it that cutting out gluten and dairy at the same time really helps? Now, the theory is that that both gluten and casein are casomorphines. They can affect the brain, and they can, make it seem as if your kid is on drugs because they affect that same pathway. But her thought is really because of the processed proteins that are in both releases excess glutamate. And when you have excess glutamate, it can cause symptoms of autism and or dementia, Alzheimer's, all those, ADD sort of things. And so I have known people who have done a low-free glutamate diet and have seen results very, very quickly. And so that's something to look into as well. But if you
say quickly, I want to kind of get
within a day, within a couple of days, maybe within a few hours kind of thing. Yeah, you would know. And if the kid has been on a low-free glutamate diet for a while and then happens to ingest something that has it in it, then all of a sudden the symptoms of autism may reappear, right? The trick is to have that thing go on for a long time. My thought is that there are, it's a Band-Aid that helps with the symptoms, but you want to even dive deeper and to look at the infections that have crossed into the blood-brain barrier. Low blood sugar is also a problem too, because when the blood sugar gets low, there's an excess release of glutamates into the brain.
Right, because that's what you need to boost you up. Yeah, the term hangry happens to a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
I don't get hangry. I just get like, oh my God, I gotta have something. And one time my husband and I were out for a walk, and I did have a good breakfast. I don't know, maybe I just processed it too quickly.
Mhm.
And I go, oh my God. And all I said is, and I really was not thinking great because I really wouldn't eat this normally. I go, just get me a ham and cheese sandwich.
You need something fast.
Oh, you need something fast. And people who suffer from that really need to work with a dietitian, because that is actually something that can help. My daughter happens to know a lot about that because of personal experience and learning to control that. Again, you go back to what you're eating, and you go back to, that leaky gut and healing that gut. And there's all kinds of ways to heal.
Fat, fiber, and protein will keep your blood sugar steady.
Yeah, fat, fiber, and protein. And they say that those three things need to be at every meal.
Yep. Yeah, I'm hypoglycemic, and probably it sounds like your daughter may have been too. I'm not sure, but
she would get a little hangry.
Yeah, and I just sort of discovered over trial and error that if I ate things with fat, fiber, and protein, reduce the sugar. If I did have something sweet, it was only after I had a meal that had sufficient amounts of those where it could sort of control into a slow burn those kinds of sugars, so to more stabilize my blood sugar. So
right, people have to understand that general sugar, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, honey and maple syrup, even though they're a better I think
they have minerals,
cleaner source, and a cleaner source of a sweetener. All of those things on a fire is just like, like oil to fire, gasoline to fire. And then when you move into, general fiber, that is going to process things slowly. So it holds it together. And so, we're getting into, more of, the meat of the fire. And then when you get to the logs, that's your protein. And your protein is something that burns more slowly. It doesn't have to, be eaten up real quickly. So that's what, between the fat and the fiber, and, your protein, that should hold you for longer periods of time and keep your blood sugar a little bit more stable.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And I like that. And some people, it's unfortunate. Either they're, they bring forward what they've learned by being not great eaters, or they get confused at what's good. Packages, labeling has become better, but when it says low fat, they don't realize to turn it over to see that there's like 26 grams of sugar in there. And that's a lot of fuel for the fire and a quick burn. So, and the dyes can have a big impact on kids' behavior. Do you have any sense of why that occurs?
It's the phenols and salicylates that are typically in them. And what's really frustrating and maddening is that if you live in the US, we allow, or the USDA, or is it the FDA, that allows artificial colors to be added into our foods. And those artificial colors here are made from petrochemicals, which is really nasty. And if you look at them, really study them, you'll find out those dyes are linked to things like allergies and eczema, hyperactivity, cancer, all those kinds of things. But if you're over in Europe, they're not allowed to add those things. And so I don't know if it's still the case, but Kraft mac and cheese, right, over here would have like FD&C 5, number 5, and then number 6. I don't know, I guess for the yellowy orange kind of flavor, or color.
Color,
right?
yeah.
Right. But if you go over to Europe, they will add the food coloring from something that's natural. It's not from petrochemicals. And it's a function of, they have a more they're looking out more for people over here. But over here in the US, right, it's like anything goes, and you can't just assume that if it's sold, it's safe, right? You think it's all been tested. It hasn't been at all. Very
Yeah.
few of them.
What's a petrochemical? Am I saying it right?
Yeah. It's been made from oil, crude oil that comes out of the ground, right?
I did want to be sure of that. I didn't want to
Yeah.
say that. I'm assuming that we're talking about the same thing. Simple things in life that you just take for granted, that big brother is looking out for you, the little brother. Absolutely not. And I don't know if it's greed that pushes our society, and sometimes it's impossible to fight, the Million Man March, it just takes so much, and things are swept under the rug, and that's really not good. Kids, it's summertime, they love ice cream. Okay, so when we're dealing with ice cream, there's a lot of sugar. Okay, so again, the recommendation that you said for yourself is only after a meal. It shouldn't kind of be that in between type snack.
Oh no.
No. Now we look at chocolate sprinkles, colored sprinkles, and oh gosh, think of how waxy they are, right? Right? So kids who have kind of behavioral issues associated with those food dyes.
Right. That's what the Feingold diet is all about, right? It's taking out artificial colors, artificial flavors, and then preservatives out of the diet too, like TBHQ and all sorts of different preservatives that are out there that you think just because it's in there, it's okay. But you want your food to rot. That's actually, a really good thing. And it's a really good rule of thumb to follow. It's like, I've seen pictures, you probably have too, of somebody taking like a McDonald's hamburger and putting it out. It doesn't get moldy and it doesn't rot because there are so many preservatives that are in there. But if I cook one at home, make it myself, make the bread myself, whatever, it'll probably rot in just a couple of days if I leave it sitting out, right? And you want that to happen.
That's nasty, but that's really good information, right?
Yeah.
And, parents today are busy. They're very, very, very busy. 2 incomes, dealing with shuttling the kids to whatever practice they have to go to. And sometimes it's so easy to fall back into, let's just pick up a pizza. What do you say to those moms and dads?
If you have the resources, hire a personal chef. That's always a good thing, at least just to sort of get you out of that rut. What I like to do, I don't have those kind of resources.
Yeah, I know, huh?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Is to, I usually do it on the weekend. Spend like an afternoon cooking big batches of food, and then you can eat half of it during the week, and then you can freeze the other half, and you can have it for later. You can do co-ops or sharing. These are really great. If you can find people that are sort of like-minded, in the same sort of allergy kind of diet, allergy-free kind of diet that you're looking for, or if it's a specialized diet like the paleo or the GAPS or a specific carbohydrate or a bodycology or, whatever kind of diet it is, or low-free glutamate kind of diet, you could all take turns and you could all make big batches of food, and then you could share it with each other. And that's the nice thing about social media, groups like Facebook, is that there are groups out there that will, you could find people in your area that could help you do those kinds of things. So share as much as possible. That would be a good idea.
Right. Planting a garden is a nice thing to do with your children as well, to see the fruits of your labor, no pun intended. And, you can utilize that in learning. I mean, there's a lot of things that are fresh that you really can't freeze, but there are things that you can pickle. My daughter has wonderful pickling recipes, and you can reach us at www.pursuewellness.us. That's our website. You can reach out to either one of us. We also offer a discovery call, which is a free call. You can talk to myself, or you can talk to my daughter, who's a registered dietitian, and she has a great resource to put together some programs like this. And it's really nice, especially if you're getting started out. You know, we run certain programs during the last 6 months, and the spring one was a whole food reset. And what it was intended to do, we gave 21 days of recipes, we gave food prep, grocery list. It just gets people thinking, how can I do this? Like, I don't even know where to begin. And so programs like that, very, very helpful. And what's really nice about my practice is that our platform is video conference. So people can jump on, you know, the whole family can be there.
Yeah.
We do, you know, we don't do just 9 to 5. So that's helpful. And we have a chat function, which is a HIPAA compliant, sort of an email kind of thing, but it is not on email. It's within the system, and it's very secure. So people can say, you know what, I had a visit with you, but I forgot to ask. You know, so we're pretty good. I know other providers, you know, as soon as you call them or you email them, they start to bill you, and that's difficult. That's difficult. You know, sometimes, you know, I have a hard time, probably as you may have found, that people expect to utilize their insurance. And that's always a hard thing, because insurance is not going to pay for this type of help. And, you know, I don't know if we can change that. A lot of people do use health spending accounts, and a lot of people do use deductibles. They, you know, out of network kind of adding to the deductibles. But, you know, if you look at what you spend on a regular basis, whether it be daily or weekly, there's a lot of different things that you're doing that were harmful, more or less, that you could actually turn around and do something for yourself. There's some really good stuff. Like, you know, one of the, it's called cauliflower. Cauliflower.
Okay.
And yeah, it's actually, it is pre-made, but it's a cauliflower pizza crust.
And,
oh
yeah, those are great. Yeah.
And so, you know, there are certain things that are quote unquote prepared that aren't so bad. And most people will say, you know, well, gosh, you know, if you can't make it yourself. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I have tried a number of gluten-free, or I did try to make a cauliflower crust. I failed miserably. There's got to be.
It's tricky.
It's tricky. Yeah. It's either too wet or falling apart, or, you know, whatever. So,
or if you have an egg sensitivity or allergy, then that's out, right?
Yeah. So again, make sure you're reading your labels. Make sure you are thinking about. I tell people whole foods, and they're like, well, what does that really mean? I'm like, the way it came out of nature. You know your farmers. Consider doing one of those
CSA.
kind of share program. Yeah. CSA. And, you know, and eat things in season. I think that's a way to know if they're really fresh or not.
Oh, sure.
Maria, is there anything we missed?
Well, yeah, you really have to read the books to go into great detail.
Yeah, we need all day for that. Hey,
yeah.
I see a lot of books behind you.
Oh, yeah.
Where's your book? Or
well, this is Brain Under Attack right here.
Ooh.
And you can find that on Amazon.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And then this is Almost Autism. This is also on Amazon. Both of them became bestsellers when they first came out on Amazon in children's health, which is awesome.
I like that. I like that you have also written to the professional. And it's not just kind of Mickey Mouse kind of thing. You're really showing, and I know that you're heavy into the research, which a lot of practitioners want to see that research before they'll believe in it, you know.
Right.
So how can they find you? What do you have a website?
I do. It's my name, of course. Maria Rickert, Rickert, Hong, HONG.com. And then Epidemic Answers is Epidemic Answers, ANSWERS.org. We're also the ones that are sponsoring the production of the Documenting Hope project. I don't know if you know about that one, or if
no. What's that?
Talk to you about it. It is in collaboration with Dr. Martha Herbert. She's an MD, PhD from Harvard. And the goal is to document that recovery can happen. And right now we have the Chirp Study, which is the Childhood Health Inventory. Oh, I forget what the RP stands for, but it's a survey that parents can take. And if you go to the documentinghope.com/chirp-study, you can sign up for that and see if you're eligible to take it. But it's long, I will say, but we're getting really, really great data out of there. And then next we'll have what's called the Flight Study, which will be looking at recovering kids with autism, ADHD, asthma, allergies. It's not guaranteed that recovery is going to happen, but we'll film them for 18 months, and we're going to provide them with access to healthcare practitioners such as yourself, or people who specialize in these kinds of kids, different kinds of therapies, all sorts of clean organic food, health coaches, whatever it takes.
You know what? Say that again, because you said, I don't know if you said church or chirp.
Chirp, like a bird.
CHIRP.
IRP, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to show off or, highlight my spelling skills right then and there.
Oh, good job.
Origin of the word, please.
Yeah.
So good. So good. Maria, lots of information. And I know that, a lot of people will be very, very happy with this interview and reach out to you. And I know you do some webinars or Facebook Lives, right?
Yeah, webinars, right, for both myself and also for Epidemic Answers. And you can sign up for the replays for any of them. They're not on YouTube. You do have to sign up for it, but they are free. So
okay, free is always good, right? Yes. Everybody who is listening, you have listened to another episode of Living with Lyme, and today we were with Maria Rickert-Hong, and she's an expert on PANS and PANDAS. And I hope you tune in again. And between now and then, please subscribe to the website so you stay up to date, www.livingwithlyme.us. And for my personal practice, you can reach out to us at www.pursue, P-U-R-S-U-E, wellness.us. Until next time, everybody, enjoy your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.